So Best of Both Worlds, Hard Dollar and CAE Mining. The purpose of these workshops is to kind of create a collaborative environment where we have the ability to share ideas together. Collaboratively, the workshops that we have scheduled are on a regular basis, independent kind of industry, different types every quarter, and then different workshops we do every month. So the idea of these things is to share ideas, kind of provide some data points that we can share amongst the community of people that are passionate about what we're doing in this space. And specifically today, we're going to talk about the mine plan, the model, the scope, the schedule, and then the interconnectivity really between the whole entire life cycle of the mining process and how that relates specifically to two things today, which is the schedule, output, and resources around the mine, as well as the estimate and measurement of and what-if scenarios within changes within the mining process on the estimate side. So we'll go into that. Real quick introductions again. And again, I apologize very much for the audio difficulties. I'm going to introduce once again Paul Binion, who's really one of our senior engineers here at Hard Dollar. Myself, Ron Babich, who's Vice President of Hard Dollar, and then Ian Lipchick, who's joining us from the UK. Thank you, Ian, for joining us today as well, who's the Senior Mining Consultant at CAE Mining. Good afternoon, everybody. So I want to recap real quick on the Hard Dollar CAE Mining synergy and introduce you to what Hard Dollar does, as well as what we're going to look at today from a collaborative effort. So we have on the left-hand side, we kind of start with the mine design, and underneath of that, we look at the model, the plan, and the mine schedule together. And that would be the CAE mining portion of what we're looking at today. The yellow buckets represent Hard Dollar, the measurement and creation of the estimate, cost, productivity, and then the resources, as well as measurement on progress for quantity and then percent complete. What's in the middle there is the blue bucket for capital scheduling, for portfolio performance, when we're talking about multiple capital performance scheduling under perhaps P6, and then for finance, for budget and actuals performance, feeding back into the progress component there, and then feeding from the progress component. All unified really by one centralized database that we provide connectivity with integration points and what we call project cost management throughout the entire life cycle. Kind of throw up just a couple of quick logos of some of the customers that we deal with today. On the Hard Dollar side, you see there on the left, and then on the CAE mining side, you see some select customers on the right-hand side. I want to jump right into kind of the crux of why we were having this workshop today, aside from the audio technicalities that we had earlier. That's not the reason why we had it. We really want to talk about the impact of change, right, and how that really affects our cost and what that does to us on resources and how we can make improvements in that process. It really starts out with an examination of what's at risk. And I wanted to bring up a couple of good kind of case studies and some great statistical data that I think it's very informative and good reading. There's a great study out there. The Castle study is one of them that compares the capital cost estimate with the actual cost incurred for international metals, uranium, and coal mining projects. And pretty comprehensive. 63 projects were in that study, and out of that, 44 had cost overruns, 7 had cost underruns, and 12 were built exactly to budget. So essentially, about 69-point-something%, I didn't put the decimal on there, almost 70% cost overrun for those projects that were part of that process. So if we look at some of the things that kind of drove the initial cause of the overruns, we look at things that were part of change. And part of change is design changes, resource changes, conditional changes from a soil condition, structural changes, and then the impact that they have. And what's really at stake, and which is why we're having this discussion today of who cares, it's time impacts, accuracy impacts, and really the insufficient analysis of the data that we have at our fingertips, because we're spending so much time doing a lot of heavy lifting whenever a change happens that we're unable to really look at the data the way we should be looking at it the smart way. And the result of that really is a 4 to 50% cost variance, which is also a good, interesting read if you want to take a look at the BIOS and Aaron Mine Project Capital Cost and Estimation Report, if you ever get a chance to look at that, it's a great study, great report that backs up some cost variance numbers up to 20%, 25% in cost variance, simply from a variety of sources. So go to the next slide. Let's just kind of break it down. So number one change, this is just an example, is on the design change. So maybe on the original plan, we have a design, what we're showing on the left-hand side of the model, and on the bottom right-hand side, the model now changes and is updated to what we're seeing in the bottom right-hand corner. Those changes now have an obvious impact on the material, the labor, and the equipment that we have, which means for every time we change the model, when we do change that model, what's that going to do to the estimate, and how are we going to keep up with those changes in a better, more efficient manner to reduce cost? Does somebody, I can hear some background noise. Is there a question? Okay. Resource change is the second example. So originally we had on the left-hand side these resources available to us, and on the updated resources now we have these limited amount of resources. So now how do we accommodate the estimate, and how do we update our plan to reflect what it's actually going to cost from a material, labor, and equipment perspective, because we've got ramifications that are going to impact the project. Third one is going to be our really condition changes. So these are, we kind of focused here on the example of ground type changes from our original plan where we went in thinking we were going to deal with a ground type 2, and then we wound up with a ground type 4. And the resources that we need to do to surround doing that type of work, the labor and the equipment, are totally different things, which kind of drives the next point, which is the structure. So I thought I was dealing with one thing originally, which I might have as a single WBS code item, and now I've got multiple codes because I've got to break that work down into 3 different pieces, where before I thought it was one because of the conditional type changes that I had. All 4 of these examples are pretty common, I think, from a change perspective. All 4 have a inevitable impact on what the estimate looks like now compared to what it did look like, and all 4 have really this dynamic series of events that now occurs from what happened in the model to what's happening now in the estimate. So what I'd like to do now is have, we'll go to the next slide, is kind of have Ian kind of walk through what impacts each one of these chevrons that you see up here. This change theme really goes through exploration, geology, mine strategy, design, scheduling, pre-feasibility, feasibility, really all throughout that whole process, and walk through how Hard Dollar and Mine2,4-D interact with each other from a Mine2,4-D perspective from the beginning of the model all the way to the estimate. And what we're going to show you here in a second is some of the what-ifs that Hard Dollar does on the resource side, and how we accommodate some of those changes, and how we really streamline that process once we receive the data from Mine2,4-D. That's kind of that's the icing on the cake that we're about to look at. So, Ian, do you want to take it from there?
Yeah, okay. So what we're looking at here is actually the CAE mining solution footprint, which covers the whole broad scope of products that we serve to the mining industry. And the one that we're focusing really on for Mine2,4-D and EPS is the mine design and scheduling. But I wanted to show this slide just because it illustrates how Hard Dollar actually fits into this footprint quite well. So, but we can go on to the next slide. Was there a question there?
Y'all coming through on the video.
You having a hard time with the video, you said?
Okay.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay, so I'll just carry on. So with Mine2,4-D and EPS, what we're looking at here is this is the workflow cycle for Mine2,4-D and EPS. What we have, we start with the design phase. So Mani and Shiro prepare a mine design for underground. There's a preparation phase, which in Mine2,4-D means that we are applying three-dimensional wireframes and various attributes to that mine design. There's a sequencing phase, which is when we say that this activity is going to occur before this activity, but after this activity. We can create quite complicated dependency sequences in there. That sequence then gets exported into our scheduling software, which is called EPS, or Enhanced Production Scheduler. EPS is a Gantt chart-based solution, and unlike Microsoft Project and Primavera, it is designed specifically for the mining industry, and it's focused on production. So instead of tasks having just a start date and an end date and a duration, which you can do in EPS, we like to use it to define rates, and you can define all sorts of production fields in EPS for tons or volume or distance, meters, feet, whatever, and base a rate on that particular driving quantity. So if you know you're advancing your development 3 meters per day, you can put that in there. Or if you're marking out your stope at 1,000 tons per week, you can put that in there. And then it will calculate your start and end dates and duration for you. And then what it will also do is it will report what you're scheduled to do in any particular time period, whether it's a day, week, month, year, quarter, and you can change it and it will recalculate right away. So it's very production-oriented, and it's very useful for doing a mine plan. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is a screen capture from Mine24D, and if you've used Mine24D before, then you might not recognize it because it's actually Mine24D version 14, which is the major upgrade to Mine24D that we will be putting out in the next few months. On the left we have the workflow, which is just one of many control panels in there. And this is the preparation workflow. So when I said on that previous slide that we do preparation, this means generating the 3D wireframe, applying attributes to them, running the block model interrogation, creating derived activities, and so on. So this is what it looks like. And the next slide. So when we get through the sequencing and we export the sequence into EPS, we get a Gantt chart view. And you can organize the grouping of types of activities based on their descriptions, their names, where they're located, all sorts of different things. And it's very customizable. The thing I'd like to draw your attention to here is in the bottom half of the screen, what we call the cross tab. And it's difficult to see with the resolution, but on the left-hand side, we have a number of headers, which you can define as a grade or tons or meters or any quantities that you'd like. And then across the right, we've got, it's displayed in the screen capture by year, but you can change it to month or quarter or create your own reporting calendar. Very customizable. And it shows you how many tons, how many BCM, and what the grade is going to be for each period. So like I said, it is very production-oriented. Like this software has been designed for the mining industry, and that's why people use it all around the world for mining, for both on a mine site and for consulting and engineering. What's the next slide?
Yeah, great, Ian. This is Paul with Hard Dollar, and I'll take up where Ian left off, and we're going to continue the workflow. Now we're going to be able to jump into Hard Dollar itself and actually work with the tool a little bit. And what we'll do is we'll first show how we take this information that's captured in EPS, all this good information, and feed that right into Hard Dollars and connect it up with resources, a more detailed structure, so that you can get to the level of cost accuracy that you need. And then we'll take a look at a couple quick scenarios where you can look at, just like Ron was alluding to, all the changes that are always happening in your projects and how you can see the effects of those changes on those resources and the productivity that's being defined as you're working with the estimate in Hard Dollar. So we're going to jump off of this screen here and jump into starting with the next step in the process. If you were using EPS and Mine24D and also using Hard Dollar, you want to take that information out of the EPS scheduling system and pull it into Hard Dollar. And the way that we can do that is through a data dump that can go right into Excel. And this is an example of what it might look like when you do that. It's a very simple export out of EPS. You can see it exports the unique identifiers that we see here, the descriptions. You can see there's different identifiers for each one of these drill drifts, for example. And then also the total units, the total meters in this case for these items. And then since this was already established in EPS, you have your start dates, you have durations. All of this information can flow into Hard Dollar. So what we'll do now is we'll take a look at how do we actually pull this data straight into the Hard Dollar tool. So we're going to jump down to Hard Dollar itself. And within Hard Dollar, I've created a project. Notice there's nothing in it at this point, just called a mining example. We're going to go up to our data source and import straight from Excel. So it brings up this little window where I can browse out and select that particular EPS data file that we just were looking at. In this case, I have two different EPS files representing two scenarios. We have a week 1 scenario that we're starting with, and then we'll look at a week 2. So I select the week 1 file, go ahead and open that file, and the next thing that I can do, just the first time when I'm first establishing this connection with that Excel template, I can do what's called mapping. If I click on this Define Mapping button, you'll see that there are all the columns listed for that Excel template. And I can match up those particular columns, the description, the total meters, and so forth, actually tell that where it's going to go in Hard Dollar. And then I can save that mapping. And this becomes very handy because as we start to talk about changes that occur, I'm going to be able to see those updates and pull them in without having to go in there every time and set up how things are going to match up in Hard Dollar. I can simply come in here and just click Import. So let's do just that. Let's go ahead, hit Import here, and see what happens. So it'll always prompt me to save the project when I do this import. And then we should see all of those particular activities, those drill drifts, the safety bays, all that information, as you can see, comes right into Hard Dollar. The unique identifiers are there, the total meters, and so forth. Now, I can also make the decision to use a lot of the functionality in Hard Dollar if instead of defining productivity in EPS, I may want to establish the advance rates and that kind of information on the Hard Dollar side. So I'll show you a couple quick examples of how you can do that. Also, once this information comes in, I can go ahead and establish WBS hierarchy in these items, and it's very easy to do so. If I want, for example, to group all of my drill drifts together under one category, I can go ahead and just create another level of detail here and grab all those drill drift items and just pull them under that particular item. So we now have all of those drifts under a single item, and I can continue to build that structure right inside of Hard Dollar. Then when I do updates, if there's a change in the model, it will update right into here and maintain the hierarchy that I established and still update the items as there's scope changes that occur. I also can now get my hands dirty and do what I really want to do in Hard Dollar, which is establish the resources, what's the labor, equipment, materials that are being used on there, so we can get to how much it's going to cost to do each of these. And to do that, I can select one item or even multiple items and start to build my crews onto these. So I can, for example, right-click on this selection and insert a crew or an assembly. This one is a drill crew, and add it to all of those items. And if I want to drill in on any one of these items to see exactly what is making up that crew, here I can pull up a worksheet for each one of those drill drifts, and I can see the actual labor, equipment that is making up that crew, as you can see here. So each one of these resources, notice that in that crew they have different quantities. I have 2 miners, for example, on this crew. So this is the kind of cost detail that I'm able to achieve in Hard Dollar to get the accuracy that I'm looking for. As you can see, there is an hourly rate associated with that that's stored in the Hard Dollar cost database. And I also am able to then define what are the work hours for each of these resources. The way that I can do that is by establishing an advance rate in Hard Dollar itself. So let's do that. We'll just do a quick example where we are going to put an advance rate of meters per day and say that we can do 3 meters that we can advance each day. And then notice that Hard Dollar has a lot of built-in functionality that backs in those numbers into my days, my shifts, my hours. And once those hours are established, that calculates with these individual rates to give me my unit and my total cost on each of these drifts as I go through them. So you can get to that level of detail in Hard Dollar, and I can continue even on the main register for each of these drifts and put in advanced rates right on the screen. Or another added functionality that Hard Dollar has is the ability to calculate this advanced rate using perhaps my own formulas and calculations that I can keep embedded in Excel and actually link right into Hard Dollar. So now that we've established some costs on here, let's spend the next 5-10 minutes where we will go through a few examples. And we'll use the same change kind of examples that were used in those PowerPoint slides just to show you the power of using these tools in conjunction with each other. And the first one that we'll do is doing an update from the design. So there's been some changes in the model. We're now going to look at week 2. And in week 2, what we'll see is that there's going to be some additional drill drifts that will get added in. And also the scope of each of these drifts, a number of them, is going to increase. So we'll see the total meters go up. So if we jump into data source and once again do an import, notice that this time I don't have to go in and worry about the mapping. That's already been established. All I have to do is browse out once again and grab the appropriate updated file. And once I click OK, I say import, and we'll see that update take place. So we see the drill drifts. You'll see the quantities change on the ones that already exist. See how they updated to 15 meters. Now that's significant because we already have costs defined on those items. And you may have noticed that the total cost now almost doubled because of that scope change. And we see that kind of detail immediately take place in Hard Dollar. We now have it at 18,000, for example, on Drill Drift 1. You can also see down below that if I scroll down far enough, there's some additional scope that came in. There's those additional drill drifts, which I can easily grab those items, pull them right back up into where they need to go in my structure, and they can add right in at the appropriate place for me. Now, there are many other changes, of course, that are taking place as you're managing the estimate, and quite often it's a game of managing your resources based on availability, and making those kinds of changes are as easy as going into any one of these items and on the fly I can make adjustments to the crew. I don't need to jump in and out of different registers or spreadsheets. I can simply right on the fly make whatever change needs to take place, such as this scoop tram. For whatever reason, we're saying that this scoop tram number 1 is not going to be available for this kind of drift, so I can switch out that scoop tram simply by clicking on my little selection register, and we're going to switch it out for scoop tram number 2, which has, you'll notice, a different rate already built in, which will then update from my 18,000 in total cost now to 19,000 based on the 50 hours that scoop tram is being used. And I can make other kinds of changes, such as changes to how many miners we may need to be able to do this advance rate of 3 meters per day. I might deduce that we need 4 miners instead of 2. And I can go ahead and make that change. It'll update my costs. And I can continue to do this what-if kind of analysis and try out different scenarios to get to where I need to be, because I have the right tool set in place to be able to do that. The last change that I wanted to focus on was sometimes there's changes into the conditions themselves. And we use the example of different types of rock that we may be drilling into. We had a type 2 and a type 4. One way that I can handle that is to keep the same crew that I have on there, but we're going to take that poorer condition into consideration and do what we call a man-hour factor. So I could jump over to my man-hour factor screen here, and you can see that I can create all different kinds of factors, and these are user-defined fields. So I could make a factor based on difficulty level, or as you can see, condition, weather. Maybe it's a more confined space we're working in. In this case, the condition, being a poorer condition, we want to add a 20% factor onto our man hours. So we're going to put 1.2 on the condition. And as I do that, if I jump back over to my display of productivity, we now see that while it had the meters per day at 3, and we had 350 man hours, we've now put a factor on those man hours. So now it's going to take 420 man hours to get the work done, which means we can only do 2.5 meters per day. Okay? And so I can do these kinds of adjustments based on conditions at a single line item level, or I could do it on an entire section of my project, or even the entire project, as maybe I'm working in a different part of the world and need to put a factor on a new template that I'm putting together. I also, of course, can always keep notes in here. So if it's type 4 instead of type 2, I can put the reasons for these adjustments that I'm making so it's documented, and I always have the insight if I go back later on to see why we did what we did. And last of all, these changes are all kept in a changes log. So you can see here on this particular item, as I've been making these changes, every one of these changes, it tells who made the change, exactly when the change was made, what was changed, and as each of those changes occur, for example, that condition change, we changed the value from 1 to 1.2, put that 20% man-hour factor on there. That caused our costs to go up $4,300, just as a simple example. So just to take a look at where we've come, we took a look at how we're able to put a model together in Mind2.4D, connect it up with a schedule in EPS, and then take that good information, let it flow into Hard Dollar, so that we can detail out and define our costs, our resources, our productivity, and we can take a look at different situations and scenarios as those changes occur that affect all of those different aspects. And we took a look at just a few of those changes and how you can handle them in the Hard Dollar system. So I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Ron, and we'll hop back in for just a couple more slides to round out the presentation.
Hey, thanks, Paul. So to kind of really fix things, if you will, from a change perspective, we want to kind of sum it up on the bottom of the bun, if you will, and that's responding rapidly to changes by using what-if scenarios is a big part of what we're trying to achieve to reduce those costs. Integrate long and short-term mine plans with the CAE Mine Plan 2.4D and EPS with Hard Dollar so that we kind of have a seamless picture there of what those changes really mean when they do occur and how quickly we can accommodate those and the resources and costs around it. Also loading a model schedule with EPS to Hard Dollar to drive to capital schedule and finance and measure progress. I think one thing that it seems kind of small, but I think it's a really big deal, is when we achieve these kind of things, we really create a chain link from the very beginning of the model all the way through to the finance department. And that's from the plan, or from the model to the plan, to the schedule, from the estimate, into finance, and then of course measuring progress as well, all tied together, which is, for most people the zen of where we're really trying to get to. And it's possible once we start to connect these things together and kind of essentially create a 5D model application that runs from beginning to end. And then lastly, really maintaining a running record of production and development. The change log, and I'm really glad to show that too, but the change log is in itself pretty awesome because it's not just within the cost model things changing, but as things are coming from the model that are changed, those things are also reflected in Hard Dollar as well too. And you'll see that on the scheduling side as well too. So basically anything that affects cost is reflected in those changes and keeping that documented all along the way. My contact's up on the boards, ron.babich@harddollar.com. Please feel free to send an email. If you want to copy the presentation, there's some really good stats in here. Plus, I think I've got the link maybe to the cost and bias error report from mining, which is a great report if you ever get a chance to read it, with a lot of detail on discrepancies in cost estimating. And then the CAE mining contact as well. I'd like to thank Ian as well for taking the time to join us today, especially overseas in the UK and going through the CAE mining aspect. If you have questions about the CAE mining product, please contact us or the information that you see in the bottom there with the CAE mining information. And we look forward to doing our next workshop next month. Again, if you think of something afterwards that you have a question about, or if you want a copy of the slides to kind of just brief through them again, please send me an email. I'm happy to send those to you. Thanks again for joining us today. Again, apologize for the technical difficulties, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you soon.